In a quiet monastery perched upon the cliffs of Montserrat, where the wind moved through broken archways like a ghost reciting prayers, a man once sat alone with parchment and ink. The year was 1492. The world newly doubled in size, the horizon trembling with promise and uncertainty. Empires had begun to redraw the earth in their own image, each map an act of conquest disguised as discovery. But in that cold chamber, the mapmaker worked not for kings or captains. He drew for silence itself. Alonso de la Rua, though even his name feels like rumor, was a monk of obscure origin. A former sailor, some say, or a scholar from Córdoba who had turned away from reason in pursuit of faith. His surviving notes, written in Latin and Catalan, speak of coasts that breathe in moonlight and lines that retreat when touched by sun. He wrote not of routes or borders, but of the subtle edges between presence and disappearance. The maps that came from his hands did not promise direction. They whispered of limits, of places that vanished when looked upon too closely. His masterpiece, now known as La Costa de la Sombra, was said to have been drawn on calfskin washed in salt water. The ink was mixed with ash, gall, and murex, a purple pigment once reserved for emperors. When the candlelight touched it, the map seemed ordinary, a scattering of islands west of the Azores, a faint outline of a coast. But when the moonlight fell across it, sailors claimed that new lines emerged, gleaming faintly like breath on glass. A hidden shore, impossible to trace by day. Fragments of this map still survive. One, kept in the archives of Lisbon, shows a coastline unlike any known landmass. Modern analysis with infrared light reveals a spiral enclosed within a crescent, a sigil drawn faintly over open sea. Beneath it, in ink barely legible, are the words, Ultra lucem umbra spirat. Beyond the light, the shadow breathes. The handwriting matches other known works from the late 15th century, yet the ink itself contains compounds not native to Europe. There are theories, as there always are. Some historians suggest Alonso had access to Arabic sources preserved from the libraries of Al-Andalus, charts drawn by scholars of the Maghreb who spoke of lands west of the known world, veiled in fog and unreachable by compass. Others see traces of older myth, perhaps borrowed from the legend of Antillia, the phantom island that appeared on maps of the early 1400s and vanished from them soon after. But there remains something stubbornly unexplainable about the way Alonso described his discovery. In one of his few surviving letters, addressed to a brother in Seville, he wrote, "I have seen the outline of a world that does not wish to be seen. It is not made of stone or soil, but of reflection. When I draw it, it turns away." Decades later, a single entry in the log of the São Noite, a Portuguese vessel lost at sea in 1514, described a coastline that shone like molten glass beyond the last of the Azores. The words echo Alonso's phrasing too precisely to be coincidence. The log ends abruptly. No wreckage of the São Noite was ever found. Only its final note remains. The stars no longer stand still. The sea hums beneath the hull. There are moments when history seems to breathe through coincidence, when fragments scattered across centuries align like constellations, only to fade again. In the early 1900s, the archaeologist Clara Voss rediscovered Alonso's map fragment in Lisbon. She noted that the vellum was coated with salt crystals, as though it had been submerged and retrieved. She traced the pigments and found traces of cinnabar from Morocco, lapis from Afghanistan, and that same rare murex dye from the Levant. How such materials came into the hands of a monastic mapmaker in Catalonia has never been explained. The legend deepens when one follows the sea itself. Near the islands of the Azores, fishermen still speak of the gray tide, a mist that rises without wind, stretching across the water like a second horizon. Instruments fail there, compasses spin. The sound of the waves seems to come from beneath the hull, not around it. Those who cross into the mist sometimes claim to see faint shapes, towers, arches, a shimmer that vanishes with the sun. Oceanographers describe it as refracted light, the product of magnetic anomalies and temperature inversions. But among the islanders, it is known by another name, a Costa Muda, the mute coast. One diver, Miguel Estrella, recorded an encounter in 1971 near São Jorge. He was exploring volcanic ridges when his equipment registered an impossible echo, a sound returning from a distance too shallow to exist. When he descended, he found stones arranged in a deliberate pattern, circular, carved with spirals that matched those on Alonso's map. His photographs, later dismissed as pareidolia, illusions shaped by expectation, showed what appeared to be a submerged structure of black basalt. He never returned to the site. Within a year, the coordinates he marked could no longer be confirmed. The seabed had shifted, the marks erased. Far to the north, where the winters never truly end, there is a forest that no longer moves. Its trunks rise like pillars of crystal. Its branches gleam under the faint Arctic light, and beneath them the ground holds not roots, but memory, ancient and cold. It is called the Petrified Forest of Damar. Others call it the Glass Grove. It lies on the rim of what was once an inland sea, where now only wind drifts, slow and eternal. Long before there were nations or maps, before the ice withdrew, this place was alive. Trees taller than cathedrals grew here. Conifers and ginkgos, cycads and ferns, their leaves glittering with the wet breath of a primeval world. Rivers ran warm. The air was heavy with the scent of resin and salt. Then, something shifted. Archaeologists remain divided. The Atlantic hides many illusions. Silted ridges that mimic walls, lava flows mistaken for columns. Yet the parallels remain unsettling. The spiral within the crescent, the geometry of the stones, the alignment with lunar cycles, all echo older traditions from the Mediterranean and North Africa, where the moon and sea were once worshipped as mirrors of the divine. No one knows if it was the turning of the poles, or the breath of a star, or a silence deeper than any storm, but in a single age, life turned to glass. Today, the forest stands frozen in time. Each trunk is no longer wood, but quartz and jasper. Amber light passes through their rings, revealing swirls of violet, crimson, and smoke. They shine in the snow like fire trapped inside ice. Geologists say the transformation began more than 200 million years ago, when volcanic ash buried the forest under layers of silica-rich mud. Rain seeped through it over centuries, molecule by molecule replacing wood with stone. What remained was not dead matter, but an imitation so perfect that even the smallest vein of bark, the whisper of growth, remains visible, as if the trees are still breathing, only slower. Local tribes, the Sami to the north, the Nenets and Komi along the tundra plains, have their own legends. They say the trees were once spirits who defied the sun. Alonso may have known this. His annotations suggest he viewed geography as a sacred language, a conversation between matter and spirit. The act of mapping, to him, was not about claiming the world but listening to it. He once wrote, "The sea remembers its own borders. I only follow where it sighs. When the world was young, the sun would not set, and the forest longed for night. So its trees began to weave shadows, calling darkness down from the sky. The sun, jealous and afraid, froze them in place. Each trunk still holds a piece of that defiance, a secret ember of dusk that never fades. When the aurora moves above the forest, the old people say it is the spirits trying again to call the night back." In 1897, an expedition led by the Russian naturalist Alexei Borodin reached the site. His journals describe miles of glittering columns, the ground littered with shattered crystal leaves. He wrote, "The air trembles here as though sound has become visible. Every step echoes not against stone, but against time itself." He took samples, slices of fossilized wood, translucent and veined like marble. What became of him is uncertain. The Montserrat records note his death in 1517, or something like it. A marginal note in the abbey's ledger reads simply, "Brother Alonso departed from light." No burial was recorded. In his cell, the monks found symbols etched into the stone walls, spirals and crescents, arranged like constellations. They also found ash, fine and pale, scattered in a circle. Some said he burned his final works. Others whispered that he burned himself into them. Under magnification, the growth rings still showed the rhythm of seasons long gone. Wet years, dry years, the slow pulse of forgotten rain. He claimed the forest hummed when the wind passed through it, not whistling, but resonating, a vibration that made the heart feel older. For decades, few believed him. His writings were dismissed as the fevered imaginings of a man lost in the Arctic sun. But in 1962, a team from Leningrad returned to the region and found what he described: thousands of upright trunks, buried partially in permafrost, their interiors gleaming like glass. Some of them emitted faint tones when struck, pure and bell-like. Spectral analysis revealed traces of iron, carbon, and silica aligned in crystalline lattices, the exact conditions for resonance. The scientists called it coincidence. But when they camped nearby, they reported something harder to explain. The forest seemed to change tone with the night. Centuries later, when Clara Voss examined the fragment under moonlight, she described a faint luminescence rising from the pigment. It faded when touched by sunlight. She concluded her notes with a single sentence, as if in resignation: "The coast exists, but not for us." When the wind shifted north, the trees sang low, like a choir beneath the earth. When the wind moved east, the pitch rose, thin, clear, trembling. At sunrise, the sound vanished altogether. Local lore calls this the breathing of the glass. The people who live near the site never cut or carry the fossil wood. They say it remembers. In some winters, when the aurora ripples green and gold over the tundra, the trees begin to glow faintly from within, as though light has found a way to return to its long-buried form. In a nearby cave, Borodin's team found shards carved with runes. They are older than any known Nordic script, older even than the carvings of the Ural hunters. Some resemble stars, others spirals. And still, the mystery endures. Every few years, ships near the Azores report mirages of land that vanish before contact. Radar detects nothing. Currents twist in ways not accounted for by known maps. The ocean remains patient, holding its secrets. The most common mark is a circle crossed by a line, an ancient symbol of the horizon, where the sun touches the world. Borodin believed the carvings were a record of the cataclysm that froze the forest, an attempt to preserve memory not in parchment or clay, but in the bones of the earth itself. When modern archaeologists examined the markings again in 2004, they noticed something strange. The orientation of the symbols matched exactly the pattern of the sky at the end of the Triassic, when the continents themselves were still gathering into one. It was as though the carvers had known or remembered a world long before their own. To walk through the forest of glass today is to step outside of time. The snow muffles all sound. Light refracts between trunks, casting rainbows across ice. Each crystal pillar catches the sun differently, as if each remembers its own color of dawn. Some stand whole, others shattered into shards sharp as blades. When you press your ear to one, you hear nothing, and yet something moves within it, slow, endless, patient. If one were to stand tonight on the cliffs of Montserrat, the same wind would move through the arches, the same sea of stars above. One might imagine Alonso's candle still flickering somewhere within, the ink still wet, the lines still retreating from the light. Perhaps what he drew was not a place but a boundary, a reminder that the world is larger than we allow it to be. Scientists call it resonance decay, the faint vibrations of minerals cooling after long compression. But to those who listen quietly, it feels like heartbeat, a rhythm not of stone, but of the memory within stone. They say that on certain nights, when the moon hangs low and the temperature falls below 40 degrees, the air above the forest becomes perfectly still. And then, without wind or cause, one of the crystal trunks begins to sing. The tone is pure, neither high nor low, but eternal. Others answer it, one by one, until the whole valley hums with a sound too large for words. No one has ever recorded it successfully. Microphones fail, equipment freezes. Only those who have stood there swear they heard it. The hymn of a forest that refused to die. There are maps that show us where to go, and there are others that lead us back into mystery, to the edge of what the mind can hold before it begins to dissolve. Perhaps it is the earth remembering its own seasons. Perhaps it is simply the wind and the cold, shaping sound from emptiness. But when dawn comes, and the first light touches the glass, the air seems to shimmer, as if time itself exhales. Somewhere between geology and dream, between silence and sound, the forest waits. Each tree, a frozen note in an unfinished song. Each breath of wind, the turning of a page in the oldest book on earth. And in that shimmering stillness, one can almost believe that nothing is ever truly lost, that even the forgotten grows luminous again, when the world is quiet enough to listen. In the heart of the Egyptian desert, where the dunes move like breathing creatures, there once stood a temple that did not worship gods, but light. Its walls shimmered under the sun like water. Travelers who approached it in the afternoon saw not a building, but a mirage made solid, a vision of geometry and silence. Somewhere in that space, between ink and erasure, between sea and shadow, the coast still breathes. Not to be found, not to be owned, only to be remembered when the light grows soft, and the horizon begins to fade into the quiet shape of the unseen. It was called by many names: Pernebu, the House of Reflection; Ain al-Zur, the Eye of the Desert; and in the scrolls of a forgotten scribe, the Temple of Mirrors. No record tells us who built it. Only fragments remain: shards of polished quartz, fused sand, and glass melted into form. Archaeologists found them scattered across a plateau west of Fayum, glinting in the sand like tears of the sun. The first Western account came from the expedition of 1842, led by the Prussian Egyptologist Karl Lepsius. He wrote of a hall of impossible light, where fragments of glass were arranged in perfect alignment to reflect the rising sun through a series of corridors. At dawn, the temple caught the first beam and carried it inward, as if the sun itself were being led into the heart of the earth. Later explorers dismissed his notes as metaphor, but Bedouin guides still speak of the place. They call it Beit al-Zilal, the House of Shadows. The desert remembers what the wind forgets. They say that at certain times of year, when the desert heat bends the horizon, one can still glimpse the outline of walls beneath the sand, glowing faintly, as though something below were remembering the light. Modern scholars trace the site to the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic king who worshipped not idols, but the sun itself, Aten, the radiant disk. It would fit his vision: a sanctuary not for statues, but for reflection, a temple where light was the only god that needed to be seen. And yet, carbon dating of the melted sand shows something older, far older, centuries before Akhenaten's revolution, before even the first pyramids rose from Giza. The quartz fragments show microscopic ripples, as though they were not cut, but shaped by heat beyond fire, by light itself. Spectral analysis reveals traces of iridium and tektite, materials found only in meteor impacts. Some researchers now suspect that the Temple of Mirrors may have stood near the site of an ancient cataclysm, the Libyan desert glass field, where a falling star once struck the earth with such force that the sands melted into golden glass. The temple, perhaps, was built from the very relics of that celestial fire. In ancient hymns, there is mention of the Lake of Shining Stone, where the gods walked with mirrored faces. Priests, it was said, would enter at dawn to watch the first light strike the altar, and there they would see themselves, and in their reflection, the face of the divine. Beneath centuries of drifting sand, there once stood a city whose name has dissolved like salt in water, whispered by traders, invoked by dreamers, feared by kings. Its walls were said to glow in the light of the moon and fade with its departure. To look into the glass was to see both heaven and earth, fused in one breath. When archaeologists unearthed fragments of the floor, they found thin layers of obsidian laid beneath the fused quartz, an ancient trick of optics that multiplied the light tenfold. Standing among the ruins at midday, even the smallest shard caught the desert sun and threw it outward like flame. No one could linger there long. The air shimmered, and the horizon seemed to bend around the ruins, as if space itself was slightly undone. In 1971, an Egyptian survey team discovered a subterranean chamber beneath the dunes. Inside, they found a mosaic, not of gold or paint, but of mirrored tiles, each only the size of a fingernail. When they shone a flashlight across the wall, the room lit up with 1,000 tiny suns. In the center lay a pedestal of black basalt, its surface perfectly smooth, reflecting nothing. An inscription ran along its edge in hieratic script. Travelers who crossed the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of Arabia, spoke of it in the same breath as a mirage. They called it Iram of the Pillars, the city of the moon. In ancient surahs of the Quran, Iram is cursed for its arrogance, its towers built high as defiance to the heavens. Archaeologists now believe those verses may have remembered a real place, buried beneath the sands near Ubar, a once thriving oasis along the incense routes, where caravans carried frankincense and myrrh across the Arabian Peninsula toward Babylon and the Levant. Light remembers its shape. The find was sealed and later forgotten, buried again by sandstorms, erased by bureaucracy and time. But stories remain. Bedouins who camp nearby speak of strange nights when the stars seem doubled. One sky above, another faintly mirrored below the earth. Their camels grow restless. The air hums faintly, like the inside of a seashell. They say it is the temple breathing. There are parallels elsewhere. In Mesopotamian myth, the god Ea was said to dwell in a palace of mirrors beneath the waters. In Greece, the philosopher Heraclitus wrote, "The soul is a mirror of fire." When the British explorer Bertram Thomas first crossed that desert in the 1930s, Bedouins told him of a city swallowed by the earth after a storm unlike any other. A punishment, they said, sent from the sky. He laughed at first, but later, satellite scans would reveal strange outlines beneath the dunes. Intersecting roads, circular formations, and traces of collapsed stone towers. Scientists now know the region's underground caverns could indeed give way in a single night, taking with them entire settlements. Yet still, something about Ubar feels older than reason, more legend than ruin. And in the Hebrew scriptures, it is written that Moses spoke to God through a mirror of shining. Perhaps all these echoes came from a single source, a memory of a place where the divine was not hidden in darkness, but revealed through light. What fascinates modern researchers most is the optical precision of what remains. Even with today's instruments, the angles of the fragments match within a tenth of a degree. They would have reflected sunlight in perfect sequence along a corridor nearly 60 meters long, terminating in the central chamber. If reconstructed, the temple would act as a solar waveguide, carrying light like a river through the stone. But for what purpose? Was it ritual, scientific, or something else? A technology of reverence lost to the centuries? Some believe it was a celestial observatory, tuned to the solstices. Others suggest it was symbolic, a way for the ancients to bind themselves to the stars, to capture the reflection of eternity in the shifting sands. At night, when the desert cools, the sand hardens into glassy plains. From above, the moonlight mirrors across them in soft, spectral waves. It is easy to see how men once believed the city itself might rise again under that silver glow, its walls breathing with the rhythm of the desert, its pillars gleaming like frozen fire. Whatever its intent, it remains one of history's quietest miracles, an architecture made not of shadow, but of light. Today, the wind covers it again. The dunes move endlessly, folding over the ruins like waves of time. But sometimes, when the sun is low and the air is still, a flash appears. A single gleam from beneath the sand, bright as glass catching its own dream. It lasts only a moment, then vanishes, leaving the watcher uncertain if it was real or reflection. Perhaps that is what the ancients meant to preserve. Not a temple of worship, but a question. If light can remember, can we? When night comes, the desert cools, and the sky becomes another mirror. The stars look down upon their reflections in the shifting dunes. And somewhere beneath, the temple of mirrors sleeps. The first written mention of Iram appears not in Arabic, but in Akkadian tablets found near Mari on the Euphrates. The name is half erased, followed by a single ideogram meaning gate. Later, Nabatean inscriptions near Petra refer to Aram or Iramel, perhaps meaning city of the exalted moon. Even Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described a white city of the south, built on sand that sang when stepped upon. Its walls of glass still dreaming of the day the sun will return to walk among them. Beneath the endless dunes of the Sahara, there is a sound that few have heard, the sound of moving water beneath a world of dust. It is not the wind, though it breathes like wind. It is the whisper of a river that never meets the sky. Old desert travelers speak of it with reverence. They call it El Bahr al-Kafi, the hidden sea. Its currents are said to move beneath the sands of Egypt, Libya, and Sudan, flowing through stone like veins beneath the skin of the earth. When the nights are still and the air is cold, some swear they can hear it. A murmur deep below, as if the desert itself were dreaming. For centuries, this was myth, until satellites, scanning the heart of the Sahara, discovered the faint echo of its truth. Beneath the dunes lies an ocean of ancient water. The Nubian sandstone aquifer, vast and silent, older than any civilization that walks above it. And so the legend endured. It stretches beneath 4 nations, holding the fossil reign of 10,000 years. A sea trapped since the Ice Age, when the Sahara was green, and rivers carved through valleys where now only sand remains. Geologists describe it as a relic of the Holocene climate shift, a buried memory of a gentler world. But for the nomads, it has always been alive. They say the river sleeps, not dies, and when the earth is ready, it will rise again. In 1993, an Italian team exploring near the Gilf Kabir Plateau drilled into the sandstone and heard the first rush of water in 40 centuries. It rose from the earth cold and clear, as if newly born. They named the well Ain Sura, after the nearby cave where prehistoric paintings of swimmers cover the walls. Figures drifting weightlessly, arms extended, as if the artists remembered what it was to live inside a sea. The discovery stirred the memory of older texts. In the writings of Herodotus, there is mention of a river that flows under the sands, feeding the wells of the west. A city that could be seen only at night. The pharaohs, too, spoke of it in hymns. The serpent of the deep coils beneath Ra's path. When he turns his gaze, the waters rise. Some Egyptologists now believe that the great oases, Dakhla, Farafra, and Siwa, were not random gifts of geology, but ancient outlets of that subterranean flow. The temples built there align precisely with the directions of buried channels, as though the priests knew the pattern of the unseen. Yet beyond the maps and data, something deeper remains, a presence that hums through the land. When you walk across certain dunes near Siwa, the sand seems to tremble underfoot. A low vibration, constant like breath under fabric. Scientists say it is acoustic resonance, wind trapped within layers of porous rock. But the Bedouins smile. They say the river dreams, and when it dreams, the sand remembers being water. At night, the desert becomes a mirror of stars, a city made of stone that glowed. Every grain of sand catches light, and the dunes resemble a frozen tide. It is then, under the moon, that the ancient stories return. They tell of Anuket, the goddess of flow, whose tears became the hidden streams of the world. When humankind turned its eyes away from the sacred rhythm of the earth, she withdrew her waters beneath it, not in anger, but in sorrow. Now she sleeps, her voice murmuring through stone. Archaeologists exploring beneath the temple of Ammonius at Siwa once found conduits carved deep into the bedrock, leading nowhere. The inscriptions nearby spoke of the river below, which carries the words of the dead. Perhaps these channels were symbolic pathways for prayer, or perhaps they were remnants of the old technology, a sacred hydraulics lost to time. In 2006, new radar imaging revealed something extraordinary. A network of dry channels stretching nearly 1,000 kilometers beneath the Great Sand Sea, their geometry unmistakably fluvial. A city that, when the sun rose, dissolved like breath on glass. Some of these channels curve directly toward the oases. Others vanish into darkness beneath the Libyan border. If water still moves there, it does so in silence, under a pressure so immense it might take millennia to surface. The scientists who mapped it called it fossil flow. But to those who live above it, it is a pulse, slow, enduring, patient. Nomads still navigate by its memory. They say the wind above it feels different, cooler, touched by an invisible moisture. In certain hollows, they dig and find damp sand, the faint scent of life hidden in dust. Some say if you place your ear to the ground, you can hear it faintly, a sound like breath returning from a dream. It is strange to think of a river that never sees light. Yet perhaps that is what all rivers become in the end. Memory flowing through silence. When Wilfred Thesiger crossed the same sands after Thomas, the Bedouins warned him never to travel under a full moon. The dunes move then, they said. The old city wakes. He dismissed it as superstition until one night he saw, far across the horizon, a shimmer. Not heat, but light. It moved as though alive, hovering above the dunes, then folded into itself and vanished. Thesiger wrote later, "It was not the mirage of day. It was a vision of something that did not wish to remain. Even the Nile, the visible vein of Egypt, may have begun as this, a whisper beneath the earth, seeking a way to speak." At the edges of the dunes, archaeologists have found shards of pottery and flint tools buried deep below the surface. Signs of human life from an age when lakes shimmered where now only wind moves. Perhaps those people heard the same sound we do now. Perhaps they followed it, as one follows the voice of water in a dream. When the storm winds rise, the desert sings. The sand moves in waves, the dunes hum in low frequencies that vibrate through the chest. It is then that the old ones say, the river turns. Not in anger, not in flood, but in remembrance. They say that one day, when the stars shift and the earth exhales, the river will wake fully, and the desert will bloom again, not with rain, but with memory. Palm groves will rise where there is only stone, and the hidden sea will open its eyes. Fragments of pillars have been unearthed, limestone smoothed by sand, etched faintly with geometric patterns found nowhere else in Arabia. One fragment bore a symbol of a crescent moon above a spiral, an echo, perhaps, of older lunar cults that once stretched from Yemen to Mesopotamia. The alignment of the ruins, too, suggests celestial intent. The main axis points not north, but to the rising of the winter moon, when its light would have struck directly through the heart of the city. Until then, it sleeps, beneath mountains of sand and time, beneath the silence of millennia. It moves slowly, endlessly, waiting. And if you stand still at night at the center of that vast golden emptiness, you may feel it too. The heartbeat of water beneath the bones of the world. The rhythm of something ancient, patient, eternal. The river that sleeps beneath the sand. They found it buried in stone older than the memory of any civilization. A hollow sphere, bronze and blackened, fused into the strata of a mine that should have known only coal. It was 1944, near a small town in South Africa called Ottestal, when miners split open a nodule of pyrophyllite and discovered something the earth was never meant to hide. A bell that seemed to hum, even when untouched. The newspapers of the time called it the Klerksdorp sphere. It may be that Iram was a moon temple first, a city second, a place where priests watched the light fade and return, learning from its rhythm the measure of time and mortality. When drought came, when the wells fell silent and the moon no longer shone, the people may have seen it as abandonment, not misfortune. So they built higher towers, mirrors of devotion, until the desert, patient and watchful, took them back. Others whispered another name, the bell that rang before time. Geologists argued it was a concretion, a natural formation, compressed under the weight of 2 billion years. But those who stood near it swore it emitted a tone, soft and steady, like a note that never faded. Its surface was smooth, striated with 3 perfect grooves that circled its circumference. No tool marks, no seams. Its balance was exact, beyond what human hands of any known era could have achieved. Tests dated the rock encasing it to the Precambrian, long before the first multicellular life, long before the notion of craft. And yet it rings. When struck lightly with metal, it produces a tone unlike anything else. Not resonance, not vibration, but something in between. A hum that seems to come from within the air itself, not from the sphere. Even now, geologists say the land beneath that region breathes. Caverns open and collapse without warning, forming sinkholes vast enough to devour a fortress whole. One such chasm, discovered in 1992, revealed pottery shards, bone, and the faint outline of walls. They named the site Shizr, but the Bedouins, smiling softly, called it by another name, Iram. Some who have stood near it described the sensation as physical, as though their bones recognized the sound. In 1982, Dr. J. W. Heine of the National Museum in Klerksdorp placed the sphere in a vacuum chamber. Even with no medium for sound to travel through, the instruments registered a faint oscillation at 30 Hz, below the range of hearing, yet undeniably present. He wrote, "It is as though the object remembers sound and continues to repeat it in silence." Scientists explained it as magnetic resonance, a trick of composition. But local miners told a different story. They said there were more buried deep in the rock, thousands of meters below, each one sleeping. When the drills struck them, they sang. Some workers refused to continue. One said the sound made him dream of oceans. When night falls over the Rub al-Khali, the dunes turn to waves of mercury. The stars lie close, as if resting on the sand itself. Sometimes, travelers report hearing faint music, wind through hollow stone, the memory of walls that once stood. The air hums with presence. Every grain of sand seems to shimmer with what was once built upon it. Across the world, similar artifacts have appeared. Spheres of hematite in the mines of India, hollow orbs of meteoric iron unearthed in Bolivia. All share the same proportions, the same rhythm of etched lines around their bodies, as though they were fragments of a code written not in language, but in vibration. Ancient myths echo the idea of such sound makers: the singing stones of the Andes, the resonant globes of Sumer said to contain the breath of the gods. In the Rig Veda, there is a hymn that speaks of a bell, whose tone was the first to call the world awake. The Mayans wrote of Tunkalna, the heart that sounds within stone. Perhaps these stories are coincidences, or perhaps they are memories of something that once was, carried across cultures like a shared dream. In 1997, a group of acousticians analyzed recordings of the Klerksdorp sphere. They found that its tone fluctuated with the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth itself, pulsing every 7.83 Hz. One scientist, privately, admitted, "It is as if the object is tuned to the planet." And there, in that strange alignment between artifact and atmosphere, lies the mystery. If you stand there at dawn before the light fully returns, you might see it too. The brief glint of a pillar, a gate, a curve of wall half emerged before the sun dissolves it again. What if sound existed before language, before time even knew its measure? What if this sphere, this bell, is not an invention, but a memory? A relic of vibration, from when the universe was still learning how to speak. Every religion begins with sound. The Hindus say the cosmos began with Om, the vibration that gave birth to matter. In the Gospel of John, the world begins with the Word. The Egyptians spoke of Hu, the first utterance that summoned form from chaos. Every tradition agrees on this. Creation began not with light, but with sound. Could this bell, buried in stone older than all memory, be an echo of that first resonance? The residue of the universe remembering its own beginning? When you listen closely to a bell, its tone never truly ends. The city that fades with the moonlight does not belong to the past. It belongs to the threshold, that quiet place between wakefulness and forgetting, where history breathes through dust and dream alike. It decays into silence, but the vibration continues, too faint for the ear, lingering in the air, in the stone, in the heart. Perhaps time itself works the same way. Not a line, but a ringing that fades slowly, echoing forever. The sphere now rests behind glass in a small South African museum. Most visitors walk past it without pause. A small, unmarked relic that hums only to those who know to listen. But sometimes, when the hall is empty and the air is still, a faint sound can be heard, deep, almost imperceptible, like the breath of the world between heartbeats. No one has recorded it. No one can. Microphones pick up nothing. And yet, those who linger swear they feel it. A low pulse, ancient, calm, beyond fear or reason. Perhaps it is the earth resonating through it. Perhaps it never vanished. Perhaps it only sleeps, waiting for the next moon to call its name across the sand. Perhaps it is simply our imagination, the echo of the silence within us. But there is another possibility, that before there were stars, before there were rivers, before there was even time, there was sound, and this bell has never stopped ringing. It rings still, softly, endlessly, somewhere beneath the hum of the planet, the memory of creation folded inside its tone. And if you listen long enough, you may hear it too, the quiet, eternal resonance of the bell that rang before time. In a monastery deep in the Black Forest, where the mist moved like breath through the pines, an old tower still stands, its stones darkened by centuries of rain, its bells long silent. Inside that tower, in a chamber lined with moss and brass, there once ticked a clock that was said to measure not time, but eternity. Far below the restless surface of the Mediterranean, beyond the reach of sunlight and storms, there lies a city that sleeps beneath coral and salt. Its streets are paved with silt, its temples are gardens now, silent forests of anemone and stone. The sea moves through it slowly, as though not to wake it, and the fish swim where priests once walked. The divers who found it in the early 1960s called it Heraclean, though others knew it from ancient Greek maps as Thonis, the city of the god. For centuries it was legend, a name whispered in the scrolls of Herodotus, dismissed by scholars as metaphor. But in 2000, after decades of searching, the archaeologist Frank Gaudio stood upon its ruins, 40 meters beneath the waves at the mouth of the Nile. Columns, statues, hieroglyphs carved with names of forgotten kings, all preserved in perfect silence, wrapped in the breath of the sea. They called it the garden beneath the sea, for it felt more like a dream than a ruin. Time had not destroyed it, water had blessed it with stillness. The monks who built it were of the Cistercian order, men devoted to rhythm, silence, and prayer. They called the clock Orbis Mundi, the circle of the world. It was crafted in the late 1300s by Brother Matthias of Rottweil, a scholar of both astronomy and faith. He believed that time was not a line but a breath, that the hours of God moved as tides do, swelling and retreating in divine symmetry. The columns were covered with coral, the doorways framed in drifting weeds. The sand shimmered with ancient coins, the remnants of altars and offerings to gods long gone. Every object seemed touched by tenderness, as though the ocean itself were keeping vigil. In the beginning, Heraclean was a port, the grand entrance to Egypt for travelers from Greece and beyond. It was said that Helen of Troy and Paris once walked its docks, that the priests of Ammonius crowned pharaohs there before they sailed upriver to Thebes, a place of light and ceremony, where sea and Nile met in sacred equilibrium. But then, one night, the balance shifted. The sea rose, the delta sank, and the city, built upon trembling silt, descended gently into water. Unlike other clocks of the age, which marked hours for work and prayer, Matthias's mechanism turned according to the pull of the moon. Its pendulum was connected to a hidden basin of water that rose and fell with the lunar tide, drawn from an underground spring said to be linked to the distant Rhine. The clock moved not by gears alone, but by the quiet pulse of the earth. No fire, no war, no ruin. Only the quiet surrender of stone to tide. It vanished so completely that, for 2,000 years, it lived only in legend. When divers returned to it, they found colossal statues lying on their sides, their faces serene as if still in prayer. One colossus of Hapi, the god of the Nile, stood 10 meters tall, its smile softened by algae, its crown hidden under drifting sand. Nearby, they discovered a temple precinct so intact that its hieroglyphs were still legible. Prayers for balance, offerings to the flood. Every symbol spoke of water. Water as life, water as God, water as judge. Archaeologists unearthed bronze vessels, stone weights, the remains of wooden ships still moored beside stone quays. Their ropes, turned to limestone by the centuries, still clung to carved rings. Local records mention its unveiling in 1389. Witnesses described it as a machine of light. At the stroke of each moonrise, the clock's face, a disk of polished silver, glowed faintly. Symbols of stars, carved around its rim, drifted as if alive. It did not strike with sound, but with resonance. A deep hum that could be felt in the chest, like the tone of a distant organ. Villagers claimed that when it rang, birds fell silent, and even the trees seemed to listen. One diver described it as a city caught between breaths, neither alive nor gone. Among the ruins lay a great stele, carved during the reign of Pharaoh Nectanebo I. Its inscription matched that of another, found miles inland, confirming that Thonis and Heracleion were one and the same city. At last, myth and earth had reunited. Yet something about the site feels older than Egypt. Beneath the pharaonic stones, sonar detected walls of even deeper origin, circular foundations, built from blocks far heavier than any of the later temples. Some align perfectly with the underwater currents that spiral through the bay. When divers swam through them, their instruments began to hum, faint magnetic pulses that matched no known pattern. Scientists called it interference, but the divers said it felt like music. For decades, Orbis Mundi kept its slow rhythm. The monks said it taught them humility, for its measure could not be rushed, its hand could not be read. It marked no minutes, no hours, only the ebb and return of light. It reminded them that the world was older than their prayers, and that silence, too, had a schedule. The local fishermen tell stories of nights when the sea glows faintly in that region, pale blue light rippling across the waves. They call it Bari El Num, the sea that dreams. They say that when the moon is high and the water is still, the statues below open their eyes. Their faces reflect the starlight through the surface, as if the gods themselves were remembering the world above. For centuries before its rediscovery, sailors claimed to hear bells beneath the water. Not the clang of metal, but a soft resonance, like wind through hollow stone. Gaudio's team recorded similar sounds during the first dives. No explanation has ever satisfied those who were there. The sound seemed to move through the body rather than the ear, steady as a heartbeat. Some compared it to the deep tone of the Klarksdorp sphere, as though the same cosmic frequency had found its way into the ocean's floor. When Matthias died, the clock was sealed. But stories lingered. Shepherds passing through the valley at night claimed to hear it still, a low vibration carried through the ground. Some said the tower itself had begun to move with it, the stones breathing as one vast lung. And so Heracleion, once a city of ports and festivals, became a cathedral of silence, a memory suspended in salt. Every column a prayer, every statue a dreamer under glass. In the museum at Alexandria, some of its treasures now rest, gilded vessels, votive tablets, the bronze face of a forgotten god. They gleam under white light, but something of the sea still clings to them. The salt breathes from their pores. Visitors say the air around them feels cooler, as if the ocean still murmurs through them. To stand before them is to feel a strange peace. The same peace that belongs to things that have already been lost and accepted it. There is no tragedy in Heracleon's story. In 1791, an antiquarian named Joseph Walther discovered fragments of the original mechanism while surveying the ruins. He wrote that the metal gears were fused not by rust but by a crystalline growth, as if the brass had begun to turn to glass. On one surviving panel, a Latin inscription read, Tempus non numerat Deum, time does not count God, only transformation. It did not drown. It descended. It did not end. It changed its element. Perhaps that is what all temples must do eventually, return to the silence that first gave them meaning. Perhaps that is the true ritual of time. When you look down through the blue water, you see its outlines. Avenues and shrines still standing, wrapped in soft shadow. The sun filters through the waves, turning pillars into gold. It is easy, then, to believe that the city is still alive, only slower. The fish drift through its gates as worshippers once did. The seaweed moves like banners in invisible wind. That same year, a clockmaker from Strasbourg, drawn by curiosity, attempted to reconstruct the device. He used Matthias's surviving notes, which spoke of harmonics, tides, and the lunar chord. When the replica was first set in motion, it moved soundlessly for 13 days, then stopped. On the 14th, its face cracked, and a faint tone filled the air. A single, sustained note that lasted until dawn. Somewhere deep within its sanctuaries, a bell tone hums, not from metal, but from memory. And maybe that is how all sacred places survive. Not in the noise of history, but in the quiet rhythm beneath it, the steady pulse of what refuses to be forgotten. So the garden beneath the sea remains, patient, dreaming, a city not lost but listening, waiting for the world above, to hear its breath again. In the northernmost silence of the world, where the air itself seems older than time, there are stones that watch the stars. It was never restarted. They stand upon a plain of ice and shadow, rising from permafrost that never thaws. Their shapes are crude circles, arcs, spirals, but their alignments are perfect. They face not the horizon, but the heavens. The people of the tundra call them the eyes of the earth. Archaeologists call them Arctic observatories, though no one truly knows what they observed. The oldest of them lies upon the Kola Peninsula in Russia's far north, a place where the midnight sun turns the sky into molten gold, and the night, when it comes, is long and absolute. They call this site Pustozersk, the city of emptiness, though no city stands there now. Only stones, and the wind that never stops speaking. When the first explorers mapped the area in the 1920s, they found dozens of circular arrangements carved into the frozen earth, each aligned with the rising of certain stars. Vega, Deneb, Polaris. Modern horologists, experts in the making of timepieces, remain divided about what Orbis Mundi truly was. Some believe it was an early attempt to synchronize mechanical motion with natural cycles, a precursor to tidal clocks centuries ahead of its time. Others, more mystically inclined, see in it a philosophical experiment, a device meant not to measure time but to meditate upon it. Some of these alignments predate recorded navigation by thousands of years. Their builders left no writing, no tools, only the geometry of intention. Some believe the Sami built them, others the long-vanished culture of the Hyperboreans, a mythical northern people said by the Greeks to live beyond the north wind, where the air was clear and the stars close enough to touch. In their myths, the gods of Olympus were born there, in light so pure it could not be looked upon. Perhaps these stones are all that remain of that light. At night, when the aurora moves across the sky, the stones seem to shimmer, as though each one catches a piece of the light and holds it still. The local elders say the stones are awake then. They say the aurora is not light but memory, the souls of the ancestors traveling the paths of the stars. And the stones, set long ago, are their markers, so they can find the way home. In 1968, an expedition led by a young astrophysicist named Yuri Balakin brought instruments to the site. There is, too, the matter of the spring beneath the monastery. Geological surveys reveal that it connects to a vast underground system that does indeed respond to lunar gravitation. Each month, the waterline rises and falls by a fraction, invisible to the eye but measurable by instrument. If the pendulum of Matthias's clock was truly coupled to this pulse, then Orbis Mundi was not merely a machine, it was a bridge between matter and rhythm, between Earth and Moon. They measured magnetic anomalies around each circle, faint but rhythmic, pulsing with the movement of the aurora. The readings formed patterns too regular to be chance. He wrote in his notes, "The stones listened to the sky. When they placed sensitive microphones into the ice, they detected low-frequency tones, subsonic vibrations that rose and fell with the flickering lights above. Some dismissed it as the shifting of glaciers. Others called it resonance, the voice of the geomagnetic field made audible. But the Sami guides smiled quietly and said, 'That is the song of the watchers.' Each winter, when the sun disappears for months and the sky becomes a canvas of moving flame, the villagers light small fires among the stones. They sit in silence, faces turned upward. To an outsider, it looks like prayer. But perhaps that is too simple. Perhaps Matthias knew something deeper, that time is not a mechanism to control, but a silence to enter. To them, it is remembrance, listening to the sky breathe. The stones of the Kola observatories are not alone. Similar patterns exist in northern Norway, in Finland, in the tundra of Siberia, circles that mark solstices and stellar paths across millennia. In Greenland, divers once found stones beneath glacial ice aligned with the same stars. And in Alaska, Inupiat elders tell of singing rocks that glow faintly when the northern lights move above them. Perhaps all these places once belonged to the same forgotten network, a vast polar cathedral of stone and silence, built to follow the turning of the heavens. Not temples, not tombs, instruments for listening. Modern astrophysicists have found that the position of these circles corresponds not to current star charts, but to those of about 10,000 years ago, the end of the last ice age, when humans still walked with mammoths and the northern sky held different poles. Whoever built them must have known the movement of the stars across epochs. Knowledge like that is not chance. It is inheritance. In the archives of Basel, a single parchment attributed to him survives. On it, a circle drawn by hand, filled with spirals and tiny moons. Around it he wrote, "In 2004, satellite imaging revealed something astonishing. A line connecting several of these Arctic sites forms a near-perfect arc across the polar circle, as though the builders were tracing the path of Earth's own rotation. Some believe it was a map not of geography but of time. Others whisper of an ancient science, a harmony between stone, sky, and magnetic field, a way of tuning the Earth to the stars. When you stand among these stones, the silence has weight, presses against you, patient and infinite. The stars feel impossibly close. Cold fires hung within reach, unmoving, ancient. The aurora drifts overhead like breath made visible. And for a moment, it seems that the stones are alive, each one listening to something that still speaks, just beyond hearing. The Sami have a word for that sound, goika, the noise of the unseen. They say if you hear it, you are being remembered. When the tide of heaven withdraws, the earth exhales. When the earth grows still, the stars remember. Not by people, but by the sky. Sometimes, during the polar night, the stones hum faintly. Not always. Only when the air is cold enough to still the blood, and the aurora burns bright as green fire. The vibration passes through the ground like the echo of a bell struck before time began. Some say it is the Earth's magnetic pulse. Others, the voices of those who once watched the stars, still keeping vigil beneath the snow. It is strange that in a place so barren, so far from warmth or color, the heavens should seem most alive. Here, where nothing grows, the universe feels close, almost kind. Perhaps that is why they built their circles here, not to worship, but to listen. The watchers are gone, their names forgotten. He called it the breath of God. Their fires are out, but their stones remain, aligned to the same stars, humming softly in the cold. And when the aurora moves across them, slow, shimmering, eternal, you can almost believe that they still stand here, wrapped in fur and silence, their faces turned upward, listening to the sky that never sleeps. In the desert of western Anatolia, where the wind carries dust like whispered prayers, there stands a doorway that leads nowhere, carved into a cliff of red rock, framed with patterns that time can barely remember. It waits, alone, ancient, unentered. They call it the Midas door, though the name is younger than the stone. To others, it is known by another name, La Puerta del Sueño Infinito, the door of endless sleep. When the French soldiers of the Revolutionary Wars reached the Black Forest in 1796, they burned many monasteries, including that of Rottweil. The tower survived, though half collapsed. Beneath the rubble, villagers later found the remnants of the clock's face, fractured silver that still shimmered in moonlight. They said it looked like frozen water. From a distance, it looks like the facade of a temple, symmetrical, precise, almost mathematical. A great triangle rises above it, filled with carved spirals and geometric suns, the symbols of Phrygia, the kingdom of forgotten kings. And yet behind the doorway, there is nothing. No chamber, no passage, only rock. It is a door that opens only into silence. When archaeologists first reached it in the 19th century, they expected a tomb. They brought lanterns, chisels, notebooks filled with speculation. But the rock was solid, no hollow within. The entrance was carved for the idea of entry, not for the act. A symbol rather than a space. Even today, on certain nights when the mist is thick and the moon is full, hikers in the valley report hearing a tone. It is not music, nor bell, nor wind. It comes from the earth itself, faint, patient, and slow. The Phrygians, who flourished in the first millennium before Christ, were a people of sound and sleep. Their music, their myths, and their rituals were said to lull the mind toward divine forgetfulness. Their king, Midas, the one who turned all he touched to gold, was also said to have worshipped the god Sabazios, the one who dies and wakes again, forever cycling through silence and renewal. Perhaps this doorway was not made for death, but for return. The carvings around it shimmer when the sun sets. Lines and spirals catch the light, and for a moment, the whole facade seems to breathe. Some locals say that at dusk, a faint hum rises from the stone, the sound of air moving through cracks that no one can see. Others say it is the breath of those who once walked beyond it, calling softly for the living to listen. There are legends among the shepherds of Yazilikiah. The written rock. They say the door was never meant for mortals. Those who linger describe it as the sound of breathing. It is for the gods who grow weary. When a god no longer wishes to wake, he passes through and sleeps within the earth, becoming part of its pulse, its minerals, its dreaming stone. The Phrygians believed the land itself was divine flesh. Sleeping gods turned to mountain and soil. To enter the rock was to return to origin. Archaeologists discovered that the geometric patterns carved above the door match certain stellar alignments. At the solstice, light from the morning sun touches the center of the doorway for less than a minute, then vanishes again. It is as though the door opens not in space, but in time, only to the light of that brief alignment, then seals itself for another year. The inscription at its center reads simply, Matar, the name of the mother goddess, the one later known to the Greeks as Cybele. She was the keeper of cycles of birth, decay, and rest, a sound without beginning or end. Her temples were built on cliffs to face the rising sun, as this one does, as if she were waking the world every dawn. And when her worshippers slept, they did so beside the earth, believing she would gather their dreams. Perhaps this door was her altar, a gate for dreams to pass through, not to escape life, but to rejoin it in another form. In the 1950s, a small team of researchers from Ankara placed vibration sensors around the doorway. They discovered faint tremors that pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, unlike earthquakes or wind. Every night, just before midnight, the stone seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting by less than a millimeter, but enough to register. No explanation was found. They called it the heartbeat of Matar. For the Phrygians, sleep was not absence. A clock that never stopped because it was never meant to move at all. It was communion. They believed that the body, in stillness, allowed the soul to walk between worlds, to converse with those who had gone before. The doorway, perhaps, was not for burial, but for invitation, a threshold for dreams. Local villagers still leave offerings at its base. Wildflowers, feathers, smooth river stones. They come at twilight, when the desert cools, and whisper the names of those they miss. They say the rock listens, and sometimes, if the air is still enough, it answers, not with words, but with warmth. The cliff holds many secrets. Nearby are tombs half-carved and abandoned, stairways leading to nowhere, and faint outlines of figures worn away by sand. It feels as though the builders began to shape a city, then stopped, as if remembering something greater. And somewhere between that breath and silence, the world continues its quiet measure, not of seconds or years, but of presence. Perhaps they understood that not all doors must open. At night, the stars gather directly above the facade. Their reflection flickers in the patterns of the stone, turning them into constellations carved by human hands. If you stand before it in silence, your own breathing begins to slow. The desert hush becomes a heartbeat, steady and deep, and you realize the truth of the name. It is not the door to death. It is the door to rest, to that eternal exhale the earth itself never stops taking. To step through would not be to end, but to return to the rhythm from which all things began. The door of endless sleep does not ask to be entered. Perhaps eternity was never about time passing. It asks to be remembered. It asks that we listen not for the sound of life, but for the space between it. The pause, the breath, the silence that holds everything. And when you close your eyes, you can feel it. The cool air, the slow stone, the hum beneath your ribs. A doorway not in the desert, but within. And beyond it, perhaps it is about time listening. Only peace. When the world sleeps, history exhales. The noise fades. The pulse of the cities, the hum of machines, the ticking of clocks. All surrender to the slow rhythm that lies beneath everything. And there, in the hush between seconds, the stories begin to move again. They rise not from books, but from dust. From rivers that sleep under sand, from bells that hum in stone, from cities that dream beneath the sea. Each story is a breath the earth forgot to release, now whispering through us as we rest. You have walked through them one by one. You followed a map that led into shadow, crossed the forgotten coasts of moonlight, heard the bells that sang before time, the voices of stars frozen in the north. You have stood before doors that never opened, and yet, somehow you entered them through silence, through wonder, through the slow turning of thought. Perhaps you noticed it along the way. There are places in the world where the sea does not rest, where it seems to breathe, to remember, to guard something beneath its surface. South of Okinawa, off the Ryukyu Islands of Japan, lies such a place. A vast formation of stone that resembles a staircase leading into darkness. The pattern that binds them all is not knowledge, nor proof, nor even belief. It is listening. The ancients built in rhythm. Their temples, their circles, their songs. All were tuned to something greater, something they could not see but could feel. To sleep was to return to that rhythm. To remember that life, like light, is not constant but pulsing. A flicker between presence and absence, between waking and the dream. When the map of shadow was drawn, it whispered not where to go, but where not to look. When Heraclean sank, it did not vanish, it only slowed. When the watchers of the frozen sky raised their stones, they were not measuring stars, but keeping time with them. And when the door of endless sleep was carved, it was not to mark an ending, but to remind us that endings are only another kind of rest. Divers call it the Yanaguni Monument. Scientists, cautious as ever, call it geology. But those who have descended into its blue silence know it feels different, older than explanation, deliberate in its design. There are no final discoveries in the language of the earth, only pauses. Moments where the world holds its breath and listens back. The wind moving through a temple, the hum beneath a glacier, the vibration of a stone remembering the stars. All are the same sentence, spoken in different ages. We are not separate from them. Our own heartbeat is another instrument in that ancient orchestra. Every breath we take is older than our name. Every dream we have is built from particles of forgotten light. And so, as you drift now towards sleep, imagine the world turning without sound. Continents breathing, oceans dreaming, stars burning so slowly they seem still. Somewhere, a bell continues to ring beneath stone. Somewhere, a river stirs beneath the sand. The first to discover it was a diver named Kihachiro Aratake in 1986. He had been following a school of fish when his light fell upon a wall, then a corner, then steps descending into shadow. The surface was too perfect, too square, too human. As he drifted along the edge, the current hummed softly, and he felt, as many have since, the strange sensation of being watched. Somewhere, the watchers still gaze upward through the cold, keeping the rhythm of the sky. Perhaps time itself is not moving forward at all. Perhaps it is a circle, expanding, contracting like lungs. Each story you heard tonight is only one breath in that endless cycle. The moment you close your eyes, another begins. Do not fear the silence that follows. It is not emptiness. It is continuation, the sound of all things returning to balance. For in sleep, the distance between you and the ancient dissolves. You are the cartographer tracing vanishing coasts. The monument lies 26 meters below the waves, carved into sandstone that the sea has worn but not erased. Columns rise like pillars of a drowned temple. Terraces lead downward, forming platforms as wide as city plazas. A face, or something like it, gazes upward through the murk. Eyes eroded, lips half-broken, yet unmistakably formed by intention. You are the diver touching the gates of the drowned gods. You are the stone, humming in the frozen dark. You are the door, unentered, eternal. The world will keep turning. The sands will shift. The stars will move through their 1,000-year dance. And beneath it all, the stories will keep breathing, patient, unhurried, waiting for the next listener. So let the sound fade now. Let the last image dissolve. Let the mind become still as water. Oceanographers say the structure could be natural, the result of tectonic shifts, the sea shaping what once was cliff into geometry. Yet others, both scholars and dreamers, note features that defy randomness. Tool marks faint but consistent. Straight corridors aligned to the solstice. Carved channels that seem designed to carry water or light. For the night is ancient, and it remembers you. Sleep, traveler. The story continues where language ends. In the currents around Yanaguni, the sea vibrates with quiet energy. Schools of fish move through the gateways as if retracing a path long known. The coral glows pale gold, and deep within, there is an opening, a narrow passage leading beneath a vast stone lintel. Local fishermen call it Ama no Kato, the gate of heaven. They say it was built by a people who listened to the sea, who carved its voice into stone. Legends from Okinawa and the Yaeyama Islands speak of Mu, a kingdom lost to the waves, older than Egypt, older than Atlantis. A land where the sea and sky were one body, and the gods walked barefoot across coral. The myths tell of a flood, not punishment but transformation, when the people of Mu chose to sink their cities so that the world above might survive. In their temples, it was written, "The ocean remembers what the earth forgets." Marine archaeologists have mapped the Yanaguni terraces in precise detail. The main platform measures 150 meters long and 40 wide, proportions far beyond chance. Steps descend in exact increments. Certain angles mirror the cardinal points, as if to mark sunrise and moonrise. Some divers report a series of stone spheres aligned in arcs, like celestial diagrams sunk beneath centuries of silt. When Dr. Masaaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus first presented his findings, he argued that the structure could date to around 10,000 BCE, an era when sea levels were lower, when these lands still touched the surface. His colleagues dismissed it, yet radiocarbon tests from nearby coral fragments suggest ancient habitation, older than known settlements in the region. Perhaps it is coincidence, or perhaps the sea simply swallowed history before it could be written. Those who dive there speak of sound, a hum low and endless, that seems to emanate from the stone itself. Some describe it as a vibration felt through the bones. The Okinawans have a word for it, Kaminari no Ko, the voice of thunder. Elders say it is not thunder, but memory. The gate remains, a perfect rectangle cut into the living rock, leading nowhere and everywhere. When the light falls at a certain angle, the water turns to silver glass, and the entrance looks like a reflection of the sky. The divers who pass through it emerge changed. Some say they dream of lights beneath waves, of a city breathing below them. Others speak of silence, a silence too large to name, too deep to escape. In the archives of Kyoto, there is a scroll dated to the Kamakura period, describing an island that once floated and fell, where the stars themselves touched the ocean. The ink has faded, but one phrase remains clear. There was a door that opened both ways, into the sea and into the self. It may have been poetry or prophecy. What is certain is this: the structure exists. Stones fitted with uncanny precision. Angles that match the ancient Jaman sites on Japan's main islands. Symbols that echo the patterns found in old pottery, spirals, waves, the shape of the moon. Some diverse bring offerings, folded paper cranes, small coins, bits of coral tied with thread. They leave them at the gate, then drift upward slowly, as if reluctant to return to air. From the surface, the sea seems calm, the sky unbroken. Only beneath, in the half-light, does one feel the weight of that ancient threshold, the sense that something waits beyond, patient, infinite remembering. On moonlit nights, fishermen say, the water above Yonaguni glows faintly, a soft blue pulse, as if the gate were still alive. When storms pass, it is said the sea exhales, bubbles rising in patterns, forming shapes like runes before they vanish. Perhaps the monument was never meant for us to find. Perhaps it was a prayer carved in stone, not to be read, but to be returned to the ocean. If you listen closely to the tide that moves over it, the sound is not of destruction but of breath. As though the sea, still remembering its builders, inhales their silence and exhales our wonder. And so the gate remains, open, endless, waiting. High in the Andes, where the clouds move like white breath along the spines of mountains, there is a valley that hums. Travelers speak of it before they name it. A sound that seems to live inside the rock itself, rising from terraces older than the Inca and fading again into silence. They call the place Sayhuite. It lies near Abancay, in southern Peru, surrounded by eucalyptus and the thin, bright air of 12,000 feet. In the center of a forgotten plaza rests a single block of granite, for meters wide, carved with hundreds of miniature terraces, stairways, channels, and basins. It looks like a city turned to stone, a map not of land but of motion. When the first archaeologists examined it in the early 20th century, they believed it was a model of an irrigation system. Later scholars saw in it a sacred diagram, a cosmic map where water once flowed as a ritual offering to the gods of fertility and storm. Local Quechua elders call it La Piedra que Habla, the speaking stone. For when rain falls upon it, the channels fill, and the stone begins to murmur. Each groove sings a different tone. The water trickles through spirals, cascades across terraces, gathers in tiny pools that glimmer like mirrors. At night, under the cold blue light of the moon, those reflections shimmer as if alive. Standing beside it, one feels a vibration, a resonance that travels not through the ears, but through the bones. Some believe it was once part of the Inca sanctuary of Sayhuite, dedicated to the goddess Pachamama. Others say it predates even them, the work of an earlier civilization whose name was lost before history began. The stone itself seems to confirm that. Its granite is not local. It was brought from miles away, carved with tools the region did not possess. Its surfaces bear no sign of chisel marks, as if the rock had been softened, shaped by sound rather than steel. Engineers have studied its geometry. The proportions of its terraces mirror those of Machu Picchu. Some of its channels align to the solstices. Others trace constellations, the llama, the serpent, the Southern Cross. There are no inscriptions, no symbols of conquest, only flowing form. The entire sculpture seems made to move with water, to turn stillness into voice. When you kneel beside it, you can see where the ancient streams once entered and left. Small stone gates, each aligned with the mountain slopes, open like mouths. Pour a single jug of water at the top and it travels through the labyrinth. Not randomly, but with precision, every drop finding its path as if guided by memory. Some researchers have suggested it was an experimental tool, a hydrological model used to test irrigation designs for the empire. Yet even those who hold to science admit there is something unsettling about it, something more deliberate than utility. As one archaeologist wrote in 1964, "The stone does not instruct, it invites. It seems aware of being heard." Local myths go deeper. The Quechua tell of a time when mountains spoke and humans answered in rivers. Each mountain, they say, held a heart, a sanko that beat through the stone. When people lost their reverence, the mountains turned their hearts to silence. But a few still whisper through places like Sayhuite. The villagers who live nearby sometimes bring offerings: flowers, coca leaves, a small stream of water poured from a clay jar. They stand in quiet as the flow begins to travel, listening to the murmur build into a soft harmony. They say it is the earth remembering its own song. In 1978, a geologist studying microfractures recorded the stone's vibrations with sensitive instruments. Even without water, the granite emitted a faint oscillation, a low frequency beyond hearing, constant, as though the mountain beneath it was breathing. He called it seismic resonance. The locals called it life. Standing there at dusk, one can feel the centuries layering like dust on skin. The Inca engineers, the priests, the voices of children running with water bowls, the first archaeologists brushing sand from carved terraces. All those moments now pressed into the quiet weight of a single rock. When the wind passes through the valley, the sound returns. A long, low hum that merges with the pulse of the blood. It does not speak in words, but in rhythm. Says perhaps, remember, the night in the Andes comes quickly. The sky deepens to indigo. The stars appear like sparks in ice. Water still threads its way through the grooves, glowing faintly as it moves. The sound it makes is not quite song, not quite silence, something between prayer and breath. Maybe it was never meant to be understood. Maybe the purpose of the stone was not to teach, but to remind that every mountain has a voice and every silence carries its echo. If you listen long enough, the stone seems to breathe with you. The wind answers it, the earth steadies, and for a moment, the noise of the world fades, leaving only that ancient murmur, the slow, sacred heartbeat of stone remembering itself.